think, as these 4 lines express, these first 2 lines are expressing, reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second 2 lines reminding us of our reason, our goal, our purpose, why we're here together, listening to these teachings, so that we can become long-term. It's the long-term goal, so that these teachings will be sowing seeds in the mind that will be eventually ripening as our Buddhahood. Why? So then we're perfectly qualified to help sentient beings, driven by this compassion. So thinking those words, think those thoughts, as we say the words in English. So we think, we take refuge, we rely upon until we're enlightened, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then thinking by the virtuous karmic seeds we plant in our mind by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha to be a benefit to suffering sentient beings. That's 1 time, and we do 2 more times in Tibetan. Sangye Chodam Soke Tongnam La Janjo Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chernyan Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchu Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Chodam Soke Tongnam La Janjo Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chernyan Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchu Sangye Drupa Shok. So, okay. Well, if we look at the Lam Rim, the packaging of the Lam Rim, everything in it leads us to the 6th of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva, which is the realization of emptiness. Everything. So that means everything is priming our mind step by step in an organic, logical, progressive way that readies us. Just like if you study, and this is the thing about the Lam Rim, and it takes a while to see this. It takes a while to hear this. We hear the word gradual path. We don't really get it. But like I always repeat, when we learn anything, it's like that. You start with the simple stuff, and it leads you to the more complicated. It's an organic process. It's very logical, psychologically organic and logical. So the general point that Buddha is making, and this is the framework for understanding emptiness, the one point, the essential point that Buddha is making that underlies everything in all the teachings, is that we suffer because in our minds there are misconceptions about reality. That's it. That's essentially what he's saying. So all the first stages of the Lam Rim are like the presentation of conventional reality. You could say it like that. So the essence of the first scope, the essence of it, is abiding by the laws of karma. So Buddha says that's reality. He's saying it's reality. What he's, everybody who presents something is saying this is what I found to be true. Whether it's a mathematician, a Christian, an Australian Aboriginal, we present from whatever point of view and wherever you got it from, this is how reality is, So what Buddhism is Buddha's presentation of how reality is, how things exist. So what's the point of that? This is the whole question. We have to ask that question. Why should I care? Why should I care about how things exist? What's that got to do with the price of fish? Because why? For the Buddha, and this is the biggest shock, we suffer because we are not in touch with how things exist at various and layers upon layers upon layers of levels. That's essentially what Buddha's saying. And it's got simple meaning, really. If you take a body of knowledge called mathematics, and according to that body of knowledge, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, if you believe that 1 + 1 = 3, whereas reality is everything around you, you go to the supermarket, you ask for 2 oranges, you'll get 2. 1 + 1, you'll get 2. Everywhere you go, maths pervades the world. The knowledge about it, and the knowledge about it pervades the world. It's just a way of just quantifying things. So according to that law, 1 + 1 is every time 2. But if you continually think it's 3, well, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to be bumping into your own unreality 100 times a day. People say, your mother says, go buy me, I need, whatever. If even more basic, if you think 1 + 1 is 3, then every time you think it's 3, but you only get 2, you'll be upset because you're not in touch with reality. It's sort of really evident. If you think that's a chocolate cake, but it's a carrot cake, and you're convinced the name of it is carrot cake, you believe it's carrot cake, but you keep asking for a carrot cake and they keep giving you the wrong cake, you'll always be upset. Because there's this disconnect, isn't there, between what you think and what's true. It's really clear, actually. We get it with these simple examples. So that's what Buddha's saying about all the, you know, when you look into the mind, you see these emotional afflictions, the disturbing emotions, the overt level of the teachings in the middle scope. Buddha's telling us about attachment and how it causes us suffering. He's mainly talking about the emotional component, the distressing, disturbing character of attachment. But when we start to really understand the mind, and this is preparing us for emptiness, we're going to start to see that the real reason that attachment causes us suffering, why it brings so much suffering, why we get so disturbed just by the having of attachment, is because attachment is rooted in being a conceptual thought, and it's a misconception. That's the definition of attachment. It's a conceptual thought that is distorting the object of attachment, in this case, the chocolate cake. I mean, we've talked about this 1,000 times, but it's in a sense a really simple concept. But because we don't join the dots and think of it this way, you know, then we don't understand it. But if we don't, and if we don't get this point, then we can never realize emptiness. Forget it, you know, forget it. So what Buddha's saying is things that exist a certain way. So one of the first teachings we hear from Buddha is that things are impermanent. We go, yeah, all right, we get that. No, he says, you don't. In our mind, for eons, he's saying, we have this deeply held misconception. On the face of it, even though we know trees die, things break, relationships end, I will die, we know this from our experience every day. Because we can't bear the thought of it, we live in denial of it. This is very obvious. We can see this. We can see this. So we've got to first, so every step of the way in the Lam Rim, it's Buddha presenting from his point of view, from his observation, not just he made it up. It's not from revelation. It's not from on high. He didn't have a dream about it. He's not speculating. And this is the point that's really important to remember. He is found from his own direct experience, from his own observation with his own mind. That this is how things exist. This is reality. This is truth. So of course it makes us nervous when it's religion, because it sounds fundamentalism, like you've got to believe this. But it's more like science. Einstein does not ask you to believe that E equals mc squared. He presents his findings and he says, over to you, baby. You can prove it too. Follow the same steps. That's what Buddha is saying. So when we get this idea that what we're doing, one approach from the beginning of practice all the way to emptiness is identifying in our mind the misconceptions that are very ancient within us, that literally cause the, as Lama puts it, the outside world and everything else to appear back to us wrongly. When we can see this working in our daily life, we are on track understanding Buddha. You know, it's very fascinating. So he's telling us very first, impermanence is how things are. And he teaches gross impermanence, which is the evident one, that things break, you know, but there's a subtler level, and that can even be confused for emptiness. In one of the different viewpoints in the various Buddhist tenets of subtle impermanence, they consider that to be gross selflessness, a view, you know, a certain level of emptiness. So it can be really, but it's not. So subtle impermanence is much subtler than the grosser level. But this reality is Buddha's explaining to us reality. And I think this is surprising, because you do not think that because you see things wrongly is why you suffer. It's very surprising to us. It's shocking, in fact. You know, we don't think that at all. But this is what he's telling us. So the very first one, he tells about impermanence, so to get familiar with that. And the consequence of that, the consequence of becoming familiar with the reality of impermanence, this is the whole point, is it brings contentment. It lessens suffering. It lessens suffering. It's the point of it. It's not just to sort of believe what Buddha tells us and shove our heads full of knowledge. It's Buddha's methodology for how to stop suffering, how to get happy. This is the bottom line, unvaryingly, from junior school to high school to university to postgraduate. So within this first scope, already Buddha's telling, we hear Tisha's teachings about impermanence and in particular death. And his agenda there is yes, to get in touch with reality, but more to give us a wake-up call, to not waste this precious life. That's his agenda in telling us about impermanence and death. So getting in touch with that reality loosens the grip of fear and clinging, Then you get to the second scope, the middle scope, and then you get to the later on, and then you begin to get first scope, you start to abide by the laws of karma. This is a really fundamental teaching of the Buddha. For many Buddhists on the planet couldn't care less about karma, like some weird, wacky idea. But this is absolutely fundamental to the entire Buddhist worldview. If we don't understand karma, and if we can't eventually prove karma to be true, or if, put it this way, if karma isn't true, if it's just a made up nonsense, well, if we can discover that this law of cause and effect isn't reality, isn't how things are, then the whole of Buddhism would collapse into a heap of incoherent nonsense, and emptiness would make no sense. Because all these views, like in any body of knowledge, like maths, they're all integrated. They're not just random things you learn, they're integrated, they're coherent within that body of knowledge. It's very important to understand that. You mightn't see it initially. So the more we get understanding impermanence, it loosens the grip of fear, lessens our suffering, and is already priming our mind to be able to understand emptiness. Then we get to hear about karma in the first scope. That really starts to loosen the grip of ego grasping, It's the explicit, that's the implicit thing that happens. Explicitly, it's about how what we think and do and say produces our own suffering and happiness, which is a big surprise to us. We think it's everybody else. No, Buddha says it's us. So that already brings kind of clarity, but it's beginning also to loosen the grip of ego grasping, the root delusion, which we have to conquer to realize emptiness, because karma, the law of cause and effect, is a marvelous example of the first level of dependent arising, which, as Lama Yeshe says, paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, is the king of logics to prove emptiness. So the explicit teaching of karma is to, abide by the laws of virtue and goodness and not harm others. Why? Because you don't want future suffering. The implicit one is already loosening the grip, because we're realizing we're not some innocent victim that got plonked on this planet by some other person, that we are the boss. We created our own lives. This is powerful already. Then we get to the middle scope, and we start to then begin to understand the way the mind works. This is where we really get the tools to really understand this view about the mind, how the mind has misconceptions in it and how the mind has virtues in it, and then how we then have to learn to get rid of the misconceptions by arguing with them. Again, the explicit teaching in the middle scope is all about the disturbing nature of these afflictions, these delusions, these misconceptions. But it's leading us, preparing our minds to start to realize, to get rid of the root delusion. We're going to learn there that, you've got the three main delusions. There's hundreds of misconceptions in the mind. They all come down to these three. The root delusion is known as ignorance, ma-rigpa, which gives rise to attachment, and then that gives rise to aversion. And these three, all the others are rooted in these, So we begin to learn this, the model of the mind in Buddhism, which is very fascinating. And we start to get familiar with this idea that there are neurotic, delusional misconceptions in the mind that are the source of my pain, that misrepresent reality to me, which is why I suffer. And we start to work on those and calm them down. And this is preparing us to get to emptiness. Then we get to the bodhisattva path. And we start to get some bodhicitta, become powerful and courageous in our compassion. And then we practice the 6 perfections, having accomplished bodhicitta. We then bop along from life to life to life. The first 4 perfections are the virtuous side, working with sentient beings in day-to-day life, life after life, perfecting generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. And then in our meditation, life after life, we're perfecting the last 2. Concentration, shamatha, which is absolutely vital. And then on the basis of that, using the various logical arguments, in particular dependent arising, in meditation, to use the logic of that to deconstruct and unpack and unravel the deeply primordially held misconception, the root one. That in here somewhere, there is definitely existing a real, concrete, pointable, solid, independent little me that runs the show. That belief is absolute, in us. And that's the root delusion from which all the other misconceptions flow. So the key function of all the delusions, attachment, anger, misconception about cause and effect, misconception about permanence, believing in a creator. These are all misconceptions, Buddha says. He's not being rude. They're misconceptions. They're things we've made up. They're not true. It doesn't mean there's not value in believing in a creator. If you believe in a creator and you practice virtue and goodness, that's a marvelous thing. It's a great way to live your life. But finally, and this is related to emptiness, the view of a creator is rooted in the misconception that things have an inherent nature. And that is not how things exist, Buddha says. So that'll only get you so far. It won't get you out of samsara. So all these misconceptions come rooted in this root misconception. So what their main function, like I said, so clear, as Lama Zopa says, the main function of these delusions, of these misconceptions, is that one way he puts it is that these misconceptions in our mind decorate on top of what does exist, layers upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. So, for example, Buddha would assert omniscience. So do the Christians. Buddha would assert infinite power. So do the Christians. Buddha asserts infinite compassion. So do the Christians. In fact, they are said to be the 3 characteristics of God. Buddha agrees there is infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite compassion. He calls it consciousness. He says everybody can achieve it. And he does not just say one person can. And he does not give the job of being a creator to that energy. So that's where the differences are. So that for the Buddha would be a misconception, that this ignorance, this view is decorating on top of that omniscient, compassionate mind, a characteristic that doesn't exist there. Attachment, for example, when you've got your attachment glasses on and the cake is on the plate, the cake that appears to you through your attachment lenses isn't the cake on the plate. This is hard to see. If you just simply made the mistake of calling the chocolate cake a carrot cake, then it's fairly easy to prove it. You just say, oh, it's a wrong name, Robina. And you show the picture of a carrot cake and you see they're different. That's an easy mistake to fix. But this mistake is far more nuanced because there is a chocolate cake on the plate. It even is a delicious chocolate cake. Maybe it won the medal in the chocolate cake competition. You could argue professionally it's the best chocolate cake. You could even say that. But we can't see the difference because we don't recognize the lie in the mind, the misconception called attachment, that causes the cake on that plate to appear back to you wrongly. This is the bottom line. That's why one of the most powerful practices, as Lama Zopa says, at least don't believe in what you see. This is really tough for us because we can't see there's a mistake. When you're angry with your ex-boyfriend because he did cheat on you, fact, it's really extremely hard to see how the way he appears to you as ugly, as horrible. You look at him and he appears terrible to you. The pain is so bad. We can't see the mistake that anger is causing. We can't see that when he was divine, you thought he was gorgeous, attachment was in your mind, he looked divine to you. And now because you've discovered he's cheated on you, he looks ugly. We can't see that it's our mind doing that. This is the point the Buddha's making across the board. So if attachment exaggerates the delicious qualities of something, and anger exaggerates the ugly qualities of something or someone, and permanence, grasping at permanence exaggerates that status of something that in fact is impermanent, and that even seeing the concept, seeing omniscient, infinite, compassionate mind and over exaggerating its status and giving it this energy of called creator, these are all, it's like they're embellishments. Delusions embellish. As Lama Zopa says, they decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. That's the thing to understand. And of course, it has to be intellectual in the beginning because it's not experiential for us, because we just buy into however anything appears. In fact, the shocking thing is, the worst part, it's bad enough, as Lama Zopa says, it's bad enough that things appear to us wrongly. The worst thing is, because of habit, we believe it instantaneously. We don't even, in fact, we don't even think that we have a view at all. We just think what appears to us is real in that thing itself. This is the killer. So if the branch delusions exaggerate specific characteristics, like arrogance exaggerates your important qualities, low self-esteem exaggerates your bad qualities, everything, they all distort, they exaggerate, they embellish. So what does the root delusion exaggerate? What does that embellish? This is the point. What it does is exaggerate the very ontological status itself of the thing itself, kind of in its bones. And that's why it's the subtlest one. That's why it's the hardest one to see, you know. It just sounds too abstract. We can hear how attachment embellishes deliciousness and the cake looks delicious. We can hear how anger embellishes ugliness. But to hear that this ego grasping, this is the colloquial term or one of the terms for ignorance, when it comes to the I, the object called I, for example, that it exaggerates its actual very existence. It embellishes. It makes it more than it is. So this is why, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, and this is implying the two truths, which we're going to talk about, that when we've realized emptiness, that from the side of the I, there's not an atom of I there. When we realize that, it's as if there is no I. But dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. That's extremely delicious, that statement, you know, because this embellishing is much more subtle. And this is why when we hear the Buddha say that from the side of the I here, first have to establish something. So we have to, you know, we have to get the conventional reality clear first. So what are we going to discuss here? We're going to discuss the phenomenon called I. So the word I, person, self, me, they're all synonyms. So first, if we're going to have to establish the emptiness of the I, we have to first establish the I. This is conventional reality, dependent arising. So we point here. What's an I, mummy? Well, she'll say, oh, well, you're one of those, and I'm one of those, and daddy's one of those. That's a thermos, and that's glasses, and this is an I. It's a name given to this phenomenon. We could broadly say, maybe it's not quite the right definition, but a mind possessor, which is a sentient being, a mind possessor is an I. Well, a Buddha is also an I, although they're technically not called a mind possessor. It's usually for ordinary beings, sentient being. But let's just say, though, a person, that's a person. So we're establishing that phenomenon. So we first establish the conventional existence of that phenomenon. We establish it. You define it, you name it, we all agree upon it. That's an I. So now then we are ready to discuss how that phenomenon in reality does exist. And that's the same for whether it's a wallet, a computer, a pair of glasses. Everything that exists in the universe by definition is the same discussion. The different Buddhist views, and when you study Buddhist tenets, there are different viewpoints, and there are many different viewpoints, nuanced different viewpoints. But as whereas they talk about some things do have the impermanence, there's the emptiness of the self, the emptiness of a person, and there's emptiness of phenomena. There's different variations of views about what exists and what doesn't. So the view that we're discussing here, and the only one I know how to talk about, because I can't forget all the other, I learned all the other, but I've forgotten it all. There's is the Prasangika Madhyamika, they call it, the consequentialist middle way view. It's the view that the Lamas talk from the perspective from, and it's the way that Tsongkhapa teaches, and this is the view here. So then according to this view, everything that exists necessarily is empty of existing intrinsically, from its own side, in and of itself, independently. These are all synonyms. So of course we have to understand these words, don't we? So here we're discussing, we're looking at the theories, so we have to understand the words. Like any theory, you've got to know the words. 1 + 1 = 2. You can't just speculate. You've got to know each meaning of every one of those words. You have to know that, then you can put it together as the experience. Same here. It's vital to know the right words. Of course, there are the other approaches like Mahamudra, where you begin to taste emptiness. There's no discussion about the words there. But this is the words one we're discussing. So okay. So this is where Buddha diverged actually from all those marvelous Hindu yogis. I don't know all the different types of schools of thought in the Indians, but these genius, extraordinarily sophisticated, amazing holy beings that have been around well before the Buddha. He came along in that system, chose to be born in that system and studied as far as he could go. And then he diverged at the point at which he diverged is his understanding of emptiness. That there is not one atom in a conventional self of an inherent self. That in here, you will not find one atom of anything that is called a self. So we have to kind of unpack that, don't we? Because it just sounds so weird, So what are the assumptions here? This is the problem, that's why we can't hear it. The assumption we have in the bones of our being is that there is in here an I that's independent of the other parts. We don't think we think that. It's totally assumed. So even when we hear that Buddha's saying, we think that there is in here an independent I, we just get confused. What are you talking about? No one ever taught you that. but he's articulating the way this ignorance, this maripa, this ego grasping functions. It believes that there is in here somewhere a little piece that's separate, independent of. Independent is the key word. Independent is the key word. Independent means, like, we always discuss this one, and this is the thing, there are many discussions we need to use to argue with ego's misconceptions, okay? So one is this discussion of one and many. If something exists, it's either one or it's more than one. It sounds so odd initially, but the more we apply this logic, the more it really makes sense. It gets us to be very rigorous. So if I say to you, my same example every time, I have a thermos, well, that's two things, isn't it? And if it's a correct statement, just conventionally, you'd have to point out two phenomena that are separate and independent of each other. And you can do that pretty easily. Independent means that the thermos does not depend upon the existence of Robina to function as a thermos. A thermos is a thing that keeps my tea warm. It does not depend upon Robina for that. That's the meaning of independent, very specifically here. It doesn't, and Robina, to function as a Robina, does not depend upon, doesn't need a thermos. So they are separate in this case and independent. That's the meaning here of independent. There's many ways in which things are independent or dependent, but here specifically. That makes sense to us. So when I say I have a thermos, it's two nouns I just stated, pronoun and one's a noun. And you'd have to be able to point out each phenomenon, and you can do that, and you'd come with two things. Very simple. Two separate things. Easy. So I have a nose. So without analysis, this is just one of the many arguments we have to use, one of the many arguments we have to use to break down ego's ridiculous misconceptions. So I have a nose. So without analysis, that's a true statement. You can look over here where the sound is coming from, and it's Robina, and she says, I have a nose, and you use your eyes. You see there is a thing on the face called a nose. You see it's there, and you can agree that she has a nose. No argument. There's no discussion. But if you analyze, and that's what we have to learn to do, because within that statement is deeply, it's embedded. A mistake is embedded in that statement. And that's what we have to try and identify. There's a mistake embedded in that statement. Because if I said two nouns, didn't I? I said I and I said no, that's two things. So if that's true, you have to point out a nose that doesn't depend upon I, Robina, for its existence. And then you have to point out a Robina that doesn't depend upon a nose for her existence. And it's evidently true that that's not so, because Robina is the name is the name of the person, and she has a nose. So it's part of who Robina is, isn't it? You can point out the nose. You can say there's the nose, but you can't point out a Robina that's separate from the nose, independent of the nose. But we think you can, because we think if you search in here, you're going to find it. Because we say it. I have a nose. There's two things. And when you say the word I, look at the feeling behind the word I. Look at it. It's so intense, isn't it? I mean, the heart beats, especially when someone says you're a creep. The I, this feeling bursts up, the heart beats, you feel pain, you feel offended, insulted, because it's like the I feel so offended, we'll say. So what we mean by that is that there is an I in there that is feeling the pain. We believe it, and that you can point that eye out, and that eye is not the nose, and is not the teeth, and is not the PP, and is not the caca, and is not the knee, and is not the eyelashes, and is not the other thousands of pieces that make up Robina. And it's the main part of Robina. It's the boss. It's the one that runs the show. That's how we feel about it. But we never, ever, ever questioned its existence. We just vaguely say, oh, well, it's in there somewhere. Or we say, the other mistake, well, it's all of me. These are the two main misconceptions. We have to argue with these. The four-point analysis in the Lam Rim, the Buddha's telling us there is no independent I. He's telling us that. But it's not enough to believe him. So we have to search, which sounds hilarious. Search for the I just sounds like hilarious, you know. But we must, because the Buddha says if something does exist, and we're talking here, that something that we think exists is an I that's independent, and independent of the other bits, which means you can point it out. There's the eye, there's the nose, there's the ear, and there's the self. He says you won't find that one. That's why the IKEA example is so great. Buddha says we've got to do the analysis, and the normal analysis you do, because IKEA wasn't around at the time of the Buddha, but he could have used the same example because carpenters made tables and things. You know, the analysis usually is based upon the whole constructed I. You start searching. Where's the piece called I? Well, there's the breast, there's this, there's the vagina, there's the toenail. You keep throwing out the bits. You're trying to locate the I. Well, the other way around, the IKEA is a great one. You put the pieces together and you're waiting for the piece in the box there, inside its own little special little gold bag called I. One of the things that's really important in this analysis, one discussion to do, to look at carefully, you know, when you it's like the I. Okay, so each piece, what you're going to discover with the IKEA analysis, you're going to find out that IKEA have done their research and they know exactly how many pieces an I is made up of. Like they make their kitchen tables, they're very good at it. They give you the exact right screws, the right pieces of wood. They don't just give you extra pieces. They don't just chuck in a few random things. No, they worked it out and they've given you the exact piece. And this is the point. Listen to this point. Each piece in that box to make that table, each tiny piece has its function. They give you a drawing. They have a screw this big, a screw that big, a screw this big. They have that kind. Every single tiny thing in that box, every one, this is a crucial piece. Every one of those pieces has a job. When they're all put together, they make the table. And you'll have nothing left in the box because each piece they've given you has a role, has a job. So this is the point about the I. It's exactly the same with the I. If you start analyzing the thousands of pieces that make up a person, the thousands of the parts of your mind, the thousands of the parts of your body, and you put them all together, you know, or you make up, you construct this entire person, every tiny piece, every eyelash, every atom, every muscle, every tendon, every piece of mind, each has its job. So the question is, if you think there's a special piece in there called I, what's its job? Buddha says you don't need one because there's no job for it to do. But we believe it's the boss. Everybody's answer when you think what's the I do, it runs things. And that's the feeling we have. And that's the same as a creator. But philosophically, they're the same mistake. The concept of a creator is an embellishment on the energy of omniscience, omnipotence, and compassion. That's what the Buddha would also say exists. But the concept of creator is an embellishment on top. You don't need creating. Sentient beings do fine creating their own suffering and their own happiness. Well, that's the parts of the universe. Well, the parts of a person do fine being a Robina. And you won't find any piece in there that's called Robina because you don't need one. The hand does its job, the nose does its job, the ear does its job, the anger does its job, the jealousy does its job. All the bits of the person made up together produce, make, function as Robina. So that's why finally, all that there is, Robina is merely a label for the parts, on those parts. That's what it means when Lama Zopa says, when you search for the I, there's not one atom of I there. It doesn't mean there's no I. It means there's no independent I. There's no little piece called I that manipulates all the other pieces, which we all assume is what the job of the I is. But when you analyze it, it doesn't have a job. It's an embellishment. It's made up because there is no little piece called I. So we're not impressed by this. It doesn't kind of blow our minds, you know. Because why? Is because the belief that there is an I in there is so utter, is so absolute, is so ancient. We can hear the words, but we don't get any taste from it. You know, when it's a realization, as Lama Zopa says, the greatest yogis have total and utter bliss when they finally see this truth, you know, and only in their subtle meditation. We can get glimpses of it, we must, all the time, but we'll only get a direct insight into it in the subtlety of our single pointed concentration. You know? So then the implication of this discovery, when it's really a genuine discovery, a real insight, is that, as Lama Zopa says, there is no fear, because there's no basis. There is no I that we believe is feeling all the pain. Literally, I mean, it sounds hilarious to us. So you've given up fear, you've given up drama. Therefore, there's no attachment, because attachment is the main voice of the fantasy I. There's no delusions. You've got more work to do before you become a Buddha, well and truly. But it literally liberates us from fear, literally liberates us from samsara, literally liberates us from suffering. The mind can only be joyful. I mean, this sounds hilarious to us. So the ego grasping, the ignorance, embellishes the very in your bones ontological status of things, you know. It over exaggerates everything. It adds on top of what isn't there, things that are, it adds on top of things that aren't there. Decorates, as Lama Zopa says. It's such a good way to put it. So the job is, from the beginning of the Lamb Rim all the way through, is continually stripping away the lies from the mind, stripping away the lies, stripping away the lies, stripping away the lies, until eventually the mind is naked and clear and radiant, with no lies left, and is in sync with reality. That's the enlightened mind. That's the result. Any questions?
You may wish to raise your hand or write the question in the chat.
In the 4-point analysis, they say the first of these 4 points is that you need to establish really clearly in your mind. Okay, go, Wolfgang.
Hello, Venerable Robina.
Yes.
When I strip away all the embellishment, the form, the body, the feeling, why is it not possible that the pure awareness stays, the consciousness, the mind by itself?
It does. There's no argument. No, that's a perfect way to put it. Of course, your awareness, when you, okay, you're not stripping away the body, and that's not what we're stripping away. We're stripping away the lies in the consciousness, the lies in the mind. It's sort of like you're stripping away the lies in the mind. So as you strip away grasping at permanence, as you strip away grasping at no cause and effect, as you strip away grasping at attachment, believing in delicious things, and anger, believing in, as you keep stripping away literally purifying your consciousness, lessening, removing the delusions from the mind, you're stripping away that. What you are left with is pure, unmanifest, all-knowing, all-compassionate awareness. Absolutely. That's no argument. It's just that we don't use the word I to refer to that. That's a component of Wolfgang. Wolfgang is made of consciousness and body. At the moment, that includes all the garbage delusions. But as Wolfgang is the label we give to the combination of body and mind, okay?
Yes.
So as you strip away, as Wolfgang does his practice, and he strips away from his mind the attachment, the anger, the jealousy, the neuroses, no cause and effect, he realizes emptiness eventually. He's left still with a body and a mind. He's still got a body there. He hasn't died yet, and he's realized emptiness. What you've got is pure, unmanifest, pure, delicious, clear mind. How marvelous. So still that pure mind and the body are the components of what we call Wolfgang. The mistake is we think there's a little mini Wolfgang in there. That's the mistake. And you get rid of that lie, and you'll find there is no little mini Wolfgang in there. That Wolfgang is the name we give, is a label we give to this body and this mind. But yes, absolutely, you are left with pure, radiant consciousness. And when you finally become a Buddha, that's all you are. Pure, manifest, unmanifest, all-knowing, all-pervasive, all-compassionate, all-wise consciousness. Absolutely. And that's beginningless and endless. Are we communicating?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Someone else? So there's not, I mean, it tends to be, we're stripping away, removing. The kind of the scary feeling is we're going to end up with nothing. No, the irony is you end up with a mind that's as big as the universe and in the nature of bliss. So it's something delicious, you know. So really, this is Wolfgang's question. It's a question of getting our head around the use of this terminology. That's all. I mean, you know, Wolfgang's a mathematician or a physicist or something. I don't know what, but if he starts talking to me in his language, I'm lost. I've got to learn all the definitions and know how to use that language. It's the same here, you know. And the thing is, the trouble is, in the Buddhist teachings, and again, in all the other spiritual teachings, there's so many variations of how these words are used. So that's why it's so important, if you're going to study one, you've got to go deeply into that one. You can't study 6 at once, you'll go crazy. So I'm talking here from the Prasangika Madhyamika point of view of the particular Gelugpa tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa. They're the words I'm using here. They're the ones I'm using. So if you want to, and any one system you go into, you use that system, you know, and learn the definitions and the clarity and the points. It's a really helpful point. It's really important. So the way of putting it also, there is a Wolfgang, but as Lama Zopa says, this is what I'm saying, there is Wolfgang, but what does exist, it's so subtle, it's as if there's no Wolfgang. It's a really nice way of putting it, because Wolfgang is merely the name. We think there's a little mini Wolfgang in here. We all think that. There's a little mini me running the show. It's kind of fear-based and panic-stricken and worried and full of drama. This drama queen. When you've given up, not the I, you've given up the belief in that fantasy, then it's not as if there's no Wolfgang. But as Lama Zopa says, when you've realized that emptiness, there is nothing from the side of Wolfgang that you can point to, there's Wolfgang. It's as if there's no Wolfgang, but there is a Wolfgang, depending on arising, but what does exist is so subtle, it's as if there isn't. So it's a really nice way of putting the two truths together. So there's another whole way of looking at it as well. So I'll stop for a second, see if there's some other questions, then I can go to this other approach. Maybe we can discuss that next week as well. The way of using the word emptiness is really important to understand it. But are there any other questions, please?
Yes, Venerable.
Yes.
My question has to do with the analogy between the ignorance about the self and the analogy you made about the creator. So why does the ignorance about the self implies the belief in a creator, or why
They're the same philosophical mistake. They're the same philosophical mistake. So if we take, just my way of putting it, if there's one entity called the universe, okay, there's a view that says There's all the parts of the universe, and that's all the sentient beings, isn't it? And then there's all the bits and pieces that sentient beings use, like flowers and buildings and all sorts of things, you know. And so the Christian teaching would say, you know, okay, now the Buddhists talk about omniscience that does exist, infinite compassion exists, infinite power, that these are characteristics of every person's mind. We can all become a Buddha. We can all become a Buddha. So the Christians say there is omniscience, there's other things, but the Buddha would say there's this embellishment on top of that, and they call that a creator. So that is a philosophical view of self-existence, of a thing that exists from its own side, that energy called God is not created, there is no cause, it's permanent, it's unchanging, and it's inherent. Exactly the opposite.
So
That's
it's a
an
projection
exaggeration of the
So
it's not a question of projection. That's not the point. I mean, that's a fine word. It's an over-exaggeration of the status of omniscience, omnipotence, and compassion. Put it that way. Buddha would agree there is that. But then the Christians, you could say, or the Muslims, put another characteristic on top, literally, of self-existence, inherent existence. No, God is impermanent. God has no cause. You know, God. And so the more you analyze that with emptiness, the more it's just not viable. It's an impossibility that something can exist like that. So the same for a person. We posit an extra piece called a little inherent I that is the boss that runs the other pieces. Well, in the same way that we can say we don't need a creator, we don't need a little I in there to run the show either. They're both presentations of the view of self-existence, because a soul or a self, an Atman, is intrinsic, has no cause, is permanent and unchanging. And these are not viable. This is not how things exist, Buddha says. Do you see?
But I see, but does it come from the same ignorance that
Yes, exactly.
makes us believe
That's the point.
in the inherent self? It comes from the
That's
same
what I'm
source.
saying. That's the point. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying. That's what I'm saying. The concept of God is literally a phenomenon that is permanent, no cause, and therefore inherent, the same as a self.
Mhm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. What else, people? So the point I want to talk about, this is the thing about one of the commonest mistakes in the world, in the study of this emptiness, is to hear it as nothingness, literally, which is nihilism. That's like chucking the baby out with the bathwater. So, I mean, it's like, and this is the thing I really want to get to now. So let's listen to this carefully, try and get our heads around this concept. So I use a simple example of my cup of tea, okay? And I pick up my cup of tea and I go like this. I go, oh, my cup's empty, I'll say. Now, we know what we mean by that is my cup is empty of tea. And this is such a powerful point. Okay, so when we say my cup is empty, you could say it means there is nothing in my cup. And it's true, there is nothing in my cup. So that's nihilism. Oh, well, there's nothing in my cup, might as well kill myself. That's the nothingness. But that's not what appeared to my mind. This is the crucial point. This is a totally different phenomenon that comes to my mind. This is the point. I am expecting tea, right? I'm expecting tea. Really specifically, I'm expecting tea. So when I say my cup is empty, I'm meaning, oh my God, my cup is empty of what I expected to be there. That is the name of the phenomenon that my mind grabs hold of. My mind does not see merely nothing there. When you go into the shop and you see all the cups and saucers on the shelves, you don't say, oh, mummy, the cups are empty. You don't say that. There is nothing in the cup, but you don't expect tea to be there in the cups in the shop. So this idea of emptiness is meaning absent or lack. It doesn't just, so there's two things. One, you just look in a cup and there's nothing there, that's nihilism. There's nothing in the cup. Nothingness is what you see, nothingness. But that's not what emptiness is referring to. What I observe when I pick up my cup is a very rich, vivid, delicious phenomenon. It's a mental construct, but it's a phenomenon that exists that's called the absence of my precious tea that I expected to be there. I got a shock. Oh my God, where's my precious tea? So one phenomenon is called nothingness, and the other phenomenon is called the absence of my tea. They're completely different things that you cognize. So the same with the self. As Dalai Lama says, when you do the search for the I, you've got to go through all the bits and pieces and you're looking for the piece called I. So you look for, you see the liver, you see the kidney, you see the left breast and the right breast and the third fingernail. You see all the other things, but you're looking for the I. It's not as if you chuck out all the bits and you end up with nothing. You will end up with nothing. You'll have a pile of bits on the table in front of you. So you will end up not with nothing, but that's not the real premise. What the realization you will end up with is the absence of this thing that you thought was there. That's the shocking piece. So that is completely different from nothingness. Nothingness is nihilism. Another example, you're convinced there's $5,000 in your bank, 5,000 euros. You're convinced. You know there is 5,000 euros. You saved it up and you put it there. Now, if you ask me to look in your bank and I have no expectation, I will tell you the truth and tell you the 0 euros. And that's nihilism. There's no zeros. There's no euros. It's very simple. I'll say there's no euros there. Sorry, Tara, no euros. That's nihilism. There's nothing there. Nothingness. But when you look in the bank account, check this, you will see a 0, but what you actually see, what you actually cognize is the absence of this precious 5,000 euros that you totally expected to be there. They're completely different cognitions. So the same with the self. The yogis, when the yogis finally realize directly at a non-conceptual level in their single point of concentration after lifetimes of work, and finally one day the penny will drop and they will see nakedly that there never has been, isn't, and never could be an independent I that they believed has been there since beginningless time. In other words, they cognize the absence of what they've always believed was there. I just cognize the absence of tea. I believe tea was there, so I get a shock. I believe the 5,000 euros is there, I get a shock. They're the unhappy absences. I mean, to discover the absence of the inherent I is the most joyful bliss on the planet. So nothingness is merely nothing. But that's not what you see. You see the absence. It's a rich quality, the absence of what you thought was there. That has to be related totally to the mind. You believe something is there. So we believe since beginningless time that there is in here an intrinsic, independent, real little I. We totally expect it and believe it. And so when you discover the absence of that, that's an incredibly vivid thing. Nothing to do with nothingness. So what's your question, Terry?
Okay. When I reach some kind of, let's say, a little bit more closer to emptiness or positive conditional state of the mind, I have continuously a completely impossible to defeat need to think about what kind of action I want to feel my life in the future and what kind of action.
I don't know what this, darling, I want questions about emptiness, about this particular topic. And I can't hear that question as related to that at all. What's your question in relation to understanding the emptiness of the self? What's your question?
I cannot accept emptiness. I want to feel the emptiness rather with future actions or
That's got nothing to do, that those words have not the understanding of emptiness at all, Terry. It's a very different discussion. That's not interpreting emptiness at all properly. You're just hearing emptiness as meaning nothingness. It's got nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing to do with that at all. Not even remotely. Nothing at all, darling. Okay. Thank you, Terry. Think about it, sweetheart. Yes, Alona.
Hi, Venerable.
Yes.
Thank you for
Yes.
your teachings.
Yes. Good.
I was wondering in this prayer that Kadrala wrote, that she wrote, perceptions, its objects, and the perceiver, all dissolves
Mhm.
within expanse, the blissful clarity
Exactly
of
right.
suchness.
That's right. Yeah.
Is that the
That's right,
emptiness she talks about?
Yeah, she's meaning that, you know, the I, the perceiver, the action of perceiving, and the object you perceive, when we realize emptiness, they all become one thing. They merge and become like one taste. That's how they talk. Yes.
And they call it suchness.
Suchness is a term using to refer to emptiness.
Okay.
Suchness meaning how things are, the way things, thusness, suchness, they're terms referring to the natural state of everything not having an intrinsic nature. It's just the way things are. That's how they talk. Yeah, exactly, darling.
That's great. And in the song of longing for Tara, you know, this the
Yeah.
ordinary view, the same name of objects are the same of their meaning. That's what we're
Yes.
talking about, that
Yeah,
misconception.
that actually, yeah, we have, that's right. We haven't gone into too much detail about that one. There are two main mistakes we make. And I was beginning to discuss that with the 4-point analysis in the Lam Rim. The one mistake, which is the one we've been discussing, is that we believe there is a piece called I. And the other mistake is that all of me is I, that the name is the same as the meaning, that the I, so as Lama Zopa says, the name can't be the basis, that the name Wolfgang, as we're discussing, is the name it's not, this is, the body and mind are not Wolfgang. The body and mind are the basis of the label. This is a massively important point. So that argues with the other point that we think all of this is me. That's what it means. Are you understanding, sweetheart?
Yes, I'm working on it. I'm
Good, darling.
listening
Good,
and understanding.
Good, sweetheart. That's fine. Yes,
And-
Wolfgang.
Venerable Robina, is it possible that the consciousness is Atman?
No, this is the point. No, you see, okay. Atman self, this is what the Hindus talk about, the Christians talk about a soul, and the Greeks call it an essence. They are talking about a thing that is inherent, that does not have any causes, that is permanent. And that's exactly philosophically what Buddha is saying can't be possible. It's not viable. The mind is
this is the
impermanent. The
definition of
mind is the
consciousness.
result of causes. There cannot be, there's no such thing as an Atman. There's no such thing as a thing that's permanent and uncaused. There can't be such a thing.
But consciousness is endless, ungenerated.
Consciousness is endless and beginningless, but it's impermanent, Wolfgang. It's changing dynamically from moment to moment. A self, a soul, a God, a creator have a characteristic of being uncaused. They might be beginningless, but they're not, there's no cause. They are permanent, they're unchanging, and they're intrinsic. These are exactly the things the Buddha is saying can't exist.
But
That
pure awareness is not changing. There's always pure
I beg your
awareness.
pardon?
I
beg your pardon?
Why is awareness by itself changing? It's always the same. It's always awareness.
It's the same in the sense that it's not mistaken, but it's dynamically changing millisecond by millisecond. It can't be, you see, the meaning of permanent in Buddhism is a really specific meaning. It means literally set in stone, unchanging, not caused. It's like, it's literally, it's like inherent. And that's exactly Buddha's argument. Such a thing cannot exist.
But is this not the same definition of pure awareness?
No, it is not. Pure awareness is your consciousness, and it is mind. It's the nature of your mind, beginningless and endless, but changing dynamically from moment to moment to moment. Dynamic.
The content of the consciousness changes, but the pure consciousness It's
No,
like
that's not the way they say it. No, that's not the way they say it. Not in the Gelugpas anyway. I don't know who you're reading. It's going to be somebody's different view, maybe. I'm only telling you the views that I understand.
of course, yeah.
Consciousness, pure consciousness, not pure, doesn't matter. Consciousness is consciousness is consciousness. Whether it's deluded or virtuous, it's still consciousness. So when you've removed the delusions, you're now tasting your true consciousness, if you like.
Yes.
But it's a dynamic, changing moment by moment, not changing from good to bad, not changing in this up and down neurotic way, but just existentially, moment by moment. This moment is the fruit of the previous moment, and the next moment is the cause of the next moment. It's a dynamic, whereas the concept of permanence, there's no movement, there's no change, it's set in stone. It's a very specific type of definition, the way they describe it, and no causes.
Okay.
So to just, okay, thanks. Who else, people?
And there's one in the chat. I was asked to ask you, why do delusions even exist in the first place? Why can't it just be pure consciousness?
Why delusions exist? Okay, well then we have to ask the question. It's very simple. Look in your garden, and if there is a weed there, your question is, why is there a weed in my garden? Well, I'm sorry to be so disappointed to give you a simple answer, because you haven't pulled it out. That's it. If there is a weed there, then it's come from a previous weed, and that came from a previous weed, and that came from a previous weed, and that came from a previous weed. So if it is there, why is it there? Because you didn't pull it out. That's the answer. It's very disappointing. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So if there is a delusion in your mind, and this is Buddha's point, he has found the delusions are adventitious. They are not intrinsic to our mind. They're not at the core of our being. They might be beginningless, but they absolutely are endless. And that's the point. That's the point about there being misconceptions. So we can, if we understand how these delusions are at their root misconceptions, then we can understand how you can remove them from the mind. So what's the logic? It's very simple. I'm trying to learn math, and I say, oh, 1 + 1 is 3. Don't be silly, Robina. I've told you already it's 2. And I'll go, oh, you're right. 1 + 1 is 2. Now listen to this. 1 + 1 is 3 is a concept. And that was in my mind. And then 1 + 1 is 2 is also a concept. So what happened was, I'm trying to learn my math and I forget and I say the wrong thing. I'm not holding on to it. And you remind me of the truth, and then I go, you're right. 1 + 1 is 2. So the question is, what happened to the concept in my mind, 1 + 1 is 3? Well, I'll tell you what happened. It's disappeared into a puff of smoke. It's gone into eternity. And what made it go is the recognition of the truth. 1 + 1 is 2. So by seeing reality, seeing there is no intrinsic I, seeing it nakedly, that is what counteracts the lie. And then you've cut the root of samsara that second, and it can never grow again. The mind is full of misconceptions. So removing those misconceptions is what finally gets us to realize our true nature of pure, blissful, radiant consciousness that is in sync with reality.
The person
Yes.
who coined the question wrote me, but why do they even exist, those afflictions? Why did they?
I answered it. You're wanting an existential in the beginning. There's no such thing as in the beginning. You've got to go backwards. If there is a delusion, you've got to really think this carefully. This is my point. I understand the answer is not satisfying. You're wanting to know why in the beginning. Your question means, when do delusions start? That's your question. It can't have started. It's beginningless. This moment of delusion, where does it come from? The previous moment. That moment of delusion, where did it come from? The previous moment. Where did it come from? And go back 1,000,000 years, and there was still delusion. Where did that come from? And you will never find this is the question for you. You will never find a first moment of delusion. How could you? because delusions are cause and effect. Necessarily, you can't have a first cause. Not by definition, you cannot. So delusions are beginningless, but you can end them. So the answer again is, why is there anger in your mind? Is because you haven't pulled it out. So you better start. Don't worry about it. It's a beginningless anger, beginningless delusions, beginningless goodness as well. Like,
right.
What?
And the person asks, what is the purpose to exist? They must have a purpose.
Pardon?
To exist, they must have a purpose. What is the purpose?
What?
The person, those afflictions, the
Well,
person.
I hear that, but what are they talking about exists? What exists? What's the question?
Delusions. Why do delusions
Holy
exist?
Jesus, God in heaven, their function is to cause you suffering. Get rid of them quick. Yes, Cyril.
Yes, Venerable. Can you again go through the logic of why the I is not the whole, the five aggregates? I understand the other one, but I always have trouble with that logic.
I know. We have hundreds of parts, okay? Do we not have hundreds of parts?
Yes.
No, don't worry about that. If all of your body and mind is the same as Cyril, hear this word, this is the one and many argument. If all of your body and mind is synonymous with the term Cyril, are you hearing my point?
Yeah.
If all your body and mind is the same as Cyril, can you hear that?
Yes.
It'll be one thing. It'll be one thing. It'll be one thing. And that means, why the hell would you say, I have a nose? Why would you say that? How stupid. Because there's only one thing. And there's not clearly one thing. You've got a nose and an ear and an eye. There are three things right there. So how can that be all Cyril? And if it is, then there's three Cyrils. And there's as many parts as you've got as many Cyrils as you've got. Because it's either one thing or more than one. So the label can't be the base. The label can't be the base. We've got to really give that one some thought. If Cyril, this is the point, if it's one thing, you're saying Cyril is the same as the parts, that means you'll see one thing, one unitary, one thing. So even just saying, I have a nose, I have an eye, is like a joke. It's like saying, it's like saying, nose has a nose, eye has an eye, and it goes on for eternity. I mean, it seems silly initially, but it's logical. What do you think?
Thank you.
Enough to think about a little bit. Okay. What else, people? Anything else before we finish? We can do the swift prayers for Rinpoche, but anything else before? So try and get again. Think about how the nothingness is one thing and the absence of something you expected. That's the point. In other words, and listen to me, this is the point. This is the point. The only person who will cognize the absence of 5,000 euros in the bank is the person who expects 5,000 euros. The only person who will cognize the absence of tea is the person who expects tea. There's a very direct relationship between that. It's not some abstract thing. There's nothing there. Not like that. It's very dynamic. Of course, the absence of 5,000 euros and the absence of tea are disappointing, but a delicious absence, which is really what absence of I is, would be, let's say you think you got cancer. You think you got cancer. The doctor told you got cancer. So you're freaking out, you're coming to terms with death, you're saying goodbye to your husband, your kids, and you're dealing with the pain, the suffering, because you believe you have cancer. Then you go to the doctor and she says, I gave you the wrong x-rays, Robina, you don't have cancer. Now listen to this. What's the joy and the bliss of that experience isn't, there's no cancer, who cares? There's no it's the absence of what you thought was there. It's a huge, rich experience. That's why the more we cling to an independent I, the more shocking, the more radiant, the more powerful, the more blissful for the yogis. And Lama says the best yogis have bliss. The lesser yogis have the most intense fear that's inexpressible when they discover the emptiness of the I they thought has existed there since beginningless time. So there's a huge relationship between the expectation, the belief in something, and when you discover it's a lie. In other words, you are convinced that your iPad is in the lounge room. You're convinced, it's there. You're convinced your iPad is in the lounge. So the only way you're going to prove it is by searching. You have to do a definitive search. You have to search everywhere imaginable, cover every atom of the lounge room until you are certain that there's no iPad there. That recognition is quite powerful. Not just, oh, there's no iPad. No, there's just nothing in the room. Not like that. Any questions? Maybe we just do the prayers now, the swift prayers. Asking precious Lamas Zopa to come back to us in a form that we can recognize. This Dalai Lama's prayer first, His Holiness's prayer first. And it's really nice because recently the meeting Venerable Roger had and others had with His Holiness, it was very encouraging. He said he's going to live for 10, 15 more years. He tells everybody that these days. And he says he can already see himself. He said, with this reincarnation, he pointed to his chest, the person about to hear. So it's already he's seeing the future incarnation. And he promised he's going to look after him and look out for him and recognize the reincarnation. So it's very encouraging. Can we have the prayers, please, Lars, or Tara or somebody? Thank you so much. So have a look. I want to read the colophon first. So this is His Holiness Dalai Lama. I composed this swift return prayer at the request of the centers of the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana tradition in general, Kopan Ogmin Jangchub Churling, Kachur Gakyal Ling Nunnery, and all the students of the late Rinpoche, headed by Roger Kunsang, who said that since the elucidator of the teachings, the incomparable Zopa Rinpoche, had suddenly departed to peace, a swift return prayer was needed. I also composed it because of my special connection with Rinpoche, exemplified, for instance, by the fact that when Rinpoche was still with us, he would undertake any project for me, whether big or small, just as I asked. I don't know if this prayer, I've got a feeling there's a later version of this prayer. Who did this? You put this together, Lars, or what? Lars, did you put this prayer book together?
Talia put the prayer book together for Laksam's purpose.
I really think you should check if there's, I got a feeling there's a later version of that last phrase. Can you really check it up, Tara, the latest? There were quite a few variations that came. Tara, just check it for the future. Please check if there's a later version.
We will check it out. We will follow up on it. Thank you.
It's devastating that Zopa Rinpoche has gone in this way. However, the most important thing is that when he was still with us, he made the precious mind of enlightenment, which of course is bodhicitta, the foundation of his practice. If his followers have been left behind, trained properly in the Guru's way of life, then it is exactly that will definitely fulfill Rinpoche's wishes. Therefore, keep this in mind. Furthermore, from now on, make requests to the 3 jewels, as well as earnest dedication prayers. So let's say the prayer. From our hearts, if you know Rinpoche or not, if you can at least appreciate he was a holy being, then we wish to have people on this planet who can embody these teachings, who can speak them to us so we can hear them. And that's the key point here. So peerless teacher, an assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. This phrase, I think, has been translated as such a great loss. Or what a great loss. That's the latest translation, Tara, so please upgrade this one. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And now Jada Rinpoche's prayer. Jada Rinpoche's next. Where's Jada Rinpoche's? Usually that comes second.
These are the only ones I have.
Why did you not put Jada Rinpoche's prayer in?
I will find out why.
Did you not know it existed?
I did not know. I'm behind.
They all come together. They always come together. They've never been separate. Always the three have come together.
Okay.
Okay, so we never mind. So we'll do it next time. We can get it next time. Get the latest version. So now we can do Khandala's prayer. That's for sure. Let's go. A supplication for the swift return of the Supreme Lord of Refuge, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, by Khandala, this is by Khandala, one of his Rinpoche's disciples. And you can put her full name in there. It's usually given her full name. I don't know what happened. So Guru, think of me. Guru, consider me. Gracious Guru, care for me. Root Guru, most gracious and kind, do not deprive us of your compassionate refuge. Listen and consider this heartfelt prayer made by a tormented disciple. Guru, you embody the blessings of the Buddhas of the three times. You may rest in great bliss, equipoise within the dhatu of unimpeded luminosity, yet the playful dance of your loving compassion can emanate in myriad ways, the swift appearance of your magical wisdom, the Rupakaya. So the point is they talk about the Dharmakaya, which is the enlightened mind, all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-powerful, unmanifest, beginningless, endless. That's the Dharmakaya. And then you've got the form body, the Rupakaya. But there are two of those. There's the emanation body, which is the one we're wanting, the one in human form that we can see and hear. And then there's the more subtle form, which we talk about in Tantra, the enjoyment body, the subtle light body of all the different Buddhas like Tara, Amitabha, and so on. They're the enjoyment body. So the time has come for you to care for us once again with your affectionate compassion. I invoke you, I call upon you, I implore you on behalf of all beings. Arise, arise, arise from the Dharmakaya. Don't rest in Kachara or other pure celestial realms. Rather, to benefit the Buddha's teachings and all living beings, swiftly return to this southern continent to spread the Buddha Dharma of study and realization. Quickly return to guide us. Poor wretched beings, such as the desperate cry of us, your disciples. Return so that we may actually behold your presence and receive the blessings of your enlightened body, speech, and mind. All violations, errors, mistakes, and broken samaya that we have made in relation to your spontaneously present awakened body, speech, mind, and activity through our being baffled, confused, and conceiving things in erroneous ways, we confess within the luminous emptiness of your three kayas. Of everything auspicious, the supreme auspiciousness, may there be the auspiciousness of emptiness and compassion conjoined, and the auspiciousness of a timely meeting between master and disciples. Through the force of the truth of unchanging suchness, may the unmistaken incarnation return quickly. This lament was made by me, a Dakini with pure faith and samaya, her eyes filled with tears of sorrow. May these wishes of a beggar woman be fulfilled through the blessings of the deities of the three roots. Perception, its object, and the act of perceiving all dissolve within the expanse, the blissful clarity of suchness. Means the I, the object, and the action, all in the taste of emptiness become one, no longer dualism. So that's it, people. Thank you, sweethearts. Close the prayer so I can see you all. Thank you so much. So think about the meaning today. And the thing to remember too is that, like, you know, with Terry's question, when we hear emptiness, we can't help but hear nothingness. We go there automatically. And why is because we believe so totally there is an independent I. When we hear Buddha say there is no I, we can't help but throw the baby out with the bathwater. We run towards nihilism. We can't help it. So it's more nuanced. The meaning is more subtle, more nuanced. In reality, so our I being empty tells us that there is an I. It affirms reality. It doesn't deny it. That's why it's so important to see emptiness in the context of the two truths. So next week, we look a little bit at the Heart Sutra and how Buddha's helping us understand this. But in general, just attempt, as Lama Zopa says, not to believe in what we see. What that means is when you feel anger, annoyance, irritation, upset, arrogant, jealous, you stop and you think things don't exist the way they appear. You catch yourself. So puts atomic bombs under ego grasping. As Papan Rinpoche says, you don't even know the meaning of the word emptiness. Just think, maybe things don't exist the way they appear. It's very powerful. Thank you, people, so much. See you next week or whenever. I don't know when. Whenever is next week.
Next
Thanks,
Thursday
sweethearts.
at 7 o'clock. Next
Well
Thursday.
done. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Venerable.
Bye.
Thank you.